Manchester. We've got Hamburg, Germany, Christian Abram. Springfield, Missouri, which is also, a pretty cosmopolitan place, with Kristen Walker. I'm in Kansas City, Kristen, so on the Kansas side, the Super Bowl champion Kansas side. Cheryl Nolan's in San Diego, Daniela Nolasco in Sao Paulo, Rula in Athens, Greece. We got Atlanta, Georgia, Moscow. This is like a travel show. Bangkok, Warsaw, North Carolina, Myanmar, Kenya, San Diego, Argentina. We are all over the world, Preston Clark.
Love it. Well, we're going to, for those wondering if this is the substance of the presentation, it is not. We're going to get started here in just about 3 minutes. And then I will step aside and let Mr. Mike Whalen run the show. I'm just here to do some of the blocking and tackling and to make sure that everything is running, and then I'll let this great group of panelists take it over to talk about negotiating virtually, getting deals done during COVID-19. My goodness, all of our lives have changed in both big and small ways. So thanks everyone for joining. And we'll also make sure that for the panelists that we'll share their contact information and Twitter handles and others, so that to the extent you want to follow up and engage with them, you'll be able to do so. Yes, Bao, we will be sending PowerPoint slides. I'm going to get into the blocking and tackling of the event in just here a second. And actually right now, look, it's top of the hour. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Preston Clark. Hopefully you can see my screen. Co-founder of Law Insider. That's probably how you found your way here. Law Insider is a contract and clause database, and you ended up at some point on our mailing list, probably because you tried to use one of our clauses or contracts and you were prompted to do so. And so welcome. We're going to be with our good friend Mike Whalen, who I'll pass the mic to in just a minute. We're going to be doing a series of webinars over the next few months. And so we would encourage you to join us to the extent that you love today, but would like us to address other topics in the future. You can email those to us. You can put those in the chat or the comment box. Our goal is to provide as much value generally, but also value that specifically addresses the challenges that we're facing in what is just a very, very unique time. Before I get started here, blocking and tackling. Yes, you will be sent a recording and the slides after the webinar today, or not really the slides, there's no slides, but to the extent that there are resources that the group is discussing today, we'll be sharing those with you. We put everything on YouTube, so Law Insider has a YouTube channel. You're welcome to subscribe to that, and that's where this will live, as well as future events. You're welcome to ask questions. We encourage you to ask questions because we're expecting a few hundred people to be on. Looks like there's already 200 and the number's going up. We're going to, we may not be able to get to every question, but we hope that we'll get to as many as we can. And then if you're a Law Insider subscriber and you have any questions or to the extent that you want to reach out to us directly, you can always do that, support@lawinsider.com. Okay. Mike, I'm going to give it to you here in 1 second. Law Insider fun facts. This is the full spectrum of my promotion before I completely get out of the way. Law Insider, what's unique about the community that we've built and the reason why we're able to do events like these centered around contracts and negotiation and drafting is because we've effectively created a filling or self-growing organic community that 300 new users every single day sign up for, and it's contract professionals, it's legal translators, it's attorneys at big law firms, it's international attorneys, it's paralegals, it's knowledge management professionals, it's legal operations professionals, like procurement professionals, on and on and on. We have subscribers based in over 50 countries, many of which were on the webinar today. For those of you who are with us and it's 2 o'clock in the morning or 10 p.m. at night, thank you. We will continue to try to do more of these at times that are convenient for you. If you would like to participate, we were interested in doing international events. So if you're ever interested in doing a webinar or a blog article or something, and you want to represent the community that you serve in that capacity, please let us know. You can reach out to me directly. You can always reach us at support@Law Insider or Preston@Law Insider. And last thing, Mike, and then I'm going to pass this to you, is that in about 2 weeks, we're going to launch our first ever blog and newsletter. And we're really excited about that, working closely with Mike Whalen on that, as well as a team of others. We already have 147 legal professionals who have applied to become contributors. So the community aspect that we have here is just really exciting and tremendous. So nothing to sell you. Don't want you to buy anything from us. Just want you to continue to come to these webinars, and to the extent that you want to add value or give us recommendations on what else we might present on, please accept any and all recommendations. You can reach me at preston@lawinsider.com. And with that, Mike, I'm going to collapse my screen and I'm going to disappear into the shadows here. I'll be online for support, but Mike Whalen, CEO of Lawyer Forward, has been a Law Insider partner and continues to just lead us in our community building efforts, and really appreciate, Mike, everything you're doing to bring us together here. And I'll let you take the show.
Thank you, Preston. So you know how when you get those emails from people's iPhones, it's got the disclaimer at the bottom, and it's like, forgive the typos from my fat thumbs. I feel like we need one of those in 2020 that just says, ignore my kids and my pets coming in. This is 2020. We just need a disclaimer. So thank you to the panelists for being here. Feel free to use the mute button liberally whenever kids break in. We all understand. And thank you guys for joining us for what will be a conversation about dealing with getting deals done during COVID. It's sort of a weird context, and we want to talk about what's new, what's changed, what's the same, what are the principles we can lean on. So with that, I'm going to do just the briefest of intros for our panelists. We'll provide longer bio information for each of them. Knowing lawyers, if I were to do bios for this very talented group, we would probably spend 45 minutes just talking about all the stuff they've done. So raise your hand when I mention you. I would make a Ferris Bueller joke, but a lot of people in here are too young to get that joke, which makes me sad and ashamed. So Colin Levy is here. He's in-house counsel at Salary.com. We've got Chris White, who is managing partner at the White Law Firm, which is a small law firm in Ohio that does a lot of oil-related deals, which is fascinating. Megan Xavier is here. She is an ethics counsel in who works in California, but actually operates out of Georgia, which we'll talk about. And she's got a podcast called Lawyers Gone Ethical, which I would encourage you guys to go listen to, especially the episode with me. It's long and a lot of words. John Tobin is here. He heads up Counsel for Creators. He does a lot of cool productizing and virtual negotiation. So a really smart person to add. And Helen, are you ready? Bukulmez, huh? Pretty close. She's a Kentucky lawyer who's certified in global arbitration and negotiation. So a really cool panel talking about this very broad question of how to get deals done during COVID. Guys, to sort of set the backdrop, this is going to be a really hard question to answer quickly, but I want to get a quick take to just set the background of what's going on. There's a lot of talk about what's the new normal, right? What's changed? I also feeling like a lot won't change, right? Law is very resistant to change. So I'm curious, just briefly, your take on what do you think about this thing has given us the activation energy to actually change something versus what's changed noise. So Helen, I'll start with you. What do you think is the real change in this? And we'll get more into each of these ideas as we go on.
Mike, thank you so much. And just like you said, if I would take the microphone and go through each one of those topics, I wouldn't leave any time to my colleagues to talk about it. So I think the biggest change COVID-19 has brought us globally is the fact that we have seen that there are alternatives to do things in a way we didn't think about before. We didn't think about legal procurement until it knocked on our doors, and those people who are not lawyers are doing a better job buying legal services. And another idea is, I think this environment has also changed us to think that although we're lawyers, we think we should always be perfect at times. I think it's teaching us to be more human. It's humanizing our legal profession. It's humanizing the way we're negotiating contracts. And it's actually opening doors globally. I grew up in Izmir, Turkey, so hello to all the people from Turkey. I'm actually speaking from Ohio, so hi, Chris. But look at us. We're talking and discussing all the opportunities, all the changes in the world. Why not consider what opportunities lay for your firm outside your traditional market?
Yeah, that's you're speaking my language on the idea of firms networking more. Megan, same question to you. What's noise here and what's real?
Well, I think part of what's real is that this has opened everybody's eyes to the fact that these other means of doing business are actually viable. I mean, I've operated virtually for years and I still hit resistance with people, rarely clients anymore, but certainly colleagues like, no, I appear by phone in court. Oh, how can you do that? You know, it's not a big deal. Well, now everyone's been forced to use these other means. And had it been like 2 weeks, I think we would have gone right back to the old ways. Oh, thank God that's over, right? And gone back. But now that it's lasting and lasting and lasting, I think we really will see traction that things like Zoom video conferences with the court are totally viable. I don't think we will replace the way we used to do business, but I think there will be a lot less resistance and we'll start to have avenues that are options that we could not get this profession to open its arms to embracing before, and necessity has forced it. But I think it's noise when we say everything's going to change and this is going to be the new normal, that we appear by video and all. No, we're not. It's going to go back to a lot of stuff being in person, but I think that it won't always be the assumed default, and there won't be a stigma attached to trying to do things remotely.
Chris, what do you think has changed?
Practice development. That's something that in an old relationship-driven practice profession like we have, practice development is always, especially in a small town community like we have and that we serve, is always very relational, very face-to-face, arm's length transactions, recruiting new clients over coffee. And when you can't sit more than closer than 6 feet to each other and all the restaurants are shut down, you have to lean into the mediums that are available to us and have been available to us, but we just haven't been developing. And so I think I agree with Helen and Megan both, but if I added another facet to what is changing, I think practice development for lawyers is really evolving. People are online more. I know my little counter that I get on Sunday from my iPhone that says how much time I've spent. I don't share those numbers with anybody because
I hate that's alert every Sunday now.
But I think leaning into that, whether it's live Facebook chats, whether it's Zoom meetups, whether it's after hours, networking events virtually, I think that the way we relationally practice develop is going to change in a way that I think it's even more accessible than we ever thought it could be for us. So in a microcosm, I think that is one thing that's going to stick.
Mr. Tobin, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is cool. It's really opened up a lot of the technical means that we have to connect with one another. So just like we're doing right now, we're seeing more companies who are sort of using remote education, webinars, really connecting. I'm seeing a lot of community developing around companies who are investing in this. And I think that's going to be part of it. I think it's going to supplement what we already have, which is the in-person client relationships and all the things that we've traditionally done. But now it's really gotten a lot of people to try these things. And I think they're going to stay, and to what extent they stay is debatable. And I think it's going to vary from person to person. But we're going to have that new layer where people are no longer afraid to do Zoom conferences with clients or a group of clients or whatever. There's going to be new ways of practicing, and I'm really excited to see how it plays out, sort of in the long term.
Colin, what do you think?
Sure. So I agree with what everyone else has said. What I would add is I think that as we are communicating virtually over these, I wouldn't say new tools, over these tools, I think that we're gonna see a shift towards more emphasis on how to communicate effectively when you can't be in the same room as someone else. I've done negotiations over the phone and virtually for a long time now, but I think that for a lot of lawyers and a lot of folks in general, communication has been sometimes a challenge between lawyer and client. So I think we're going to see an emphasis on how to communicate more effectively when you can't actually see the other person on the other side or can't visually view their body language, because I think you can tell a lot through body language. When you don't have that, you have to sort of listen more carefully. So I think that will be a change. The other thing that I think will shift too is now that we know this technology can be used for these purposes of having these kinds of meetings and negotiations and transactions and what have you, an emphasis towards learning these technologies and understanding what exactly they're best used for and how they can best be used, because now we're all using them. So now since we have to use them, we might as well how to use them effectively. So I think we're going to see that too. I would just add a broader point, which is that, I've seen a lot of articles pointing towards, everything's going to completely shift and we're going to revolutionize the practice of law. Finally, and things are just going to be a brand new day for the legal industry. I don't want to burst anyone's bubbles, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. That's not going to happen. What will happen is, in my view, is those firms and operations that have been wanting to change but haven't had a good enough kick in their behind to change will now change. Those that haven't are doing so for mainly purposes of survival. And then I think it remains an open question as to whether or not they shift back or not. I think part of that depends on how long this goes on for, which is anyone's guess.
Yeah, Colin, and I do think it's very context dependent. Like if this lasts longer, you'll see obviously a lot more change. Colin, I want to put it back to you on that question that you mentioned of, reading people. How would you suggest that someone, if you're not in the room, if you can't see how they're reacting, while you're trying to figure out a deal and kind of read their intentions, if you can't see them, how do you do that? How do you virtually read people?
Sure. So I think one of the things you really have to do is listen. And it sounds very easy to say, just listen to them. That's all you have to do. But what I mean by that is you really have to hone in on their tone and understand, okay, if they're pausing, well, they're likely not pausing just for purposes of pausing. They're likely pausing because they're thinking about something you said. If there's sign, if you notice their tone is increasing in volume, or if you notice that they're talking more quickly, those are the kind of cues I think you want to pick up on, especially when you're negotiating something and you can't see what the other side is doing, because they're all cues that your body is naturally just giving off about your approach, about your attitude, about kind of how you feel about something. And that can in turn inform you as to whether or not you've said something that has literally struck a nerve or has perhaps gotten them excited or is something that they want to talk about more. So those are the kinds of things I would hone in on. And also the other part of it too is if you hear something and you don't quite understand what they've said, it's always helpful, and I think it's a useful skill to mirror kind of what they said in terms of saying, all right, this is what I've understood you saying. Is that, are we on the same page here? If so, here's how I think we should move forward. And again, this takes time. I don't think it's a natural skill for everyone, but given that we don't have much choice, I think these are really important skills you need to keep in mind and use going forward.
Yeah, Megan, we talked a little bit about with mediations, one of the functions is you're supposed to get people talking separately so you can really see how people feel. I feel like in the deal context, you're sort of mediating in the sense that you're trying to get two parties, to see the good for both of them. How in this context do you just talk to your client separately, right? If you're engaging in these virtual deals, how do you just separate out conversations?
Well, some of the technology allows us like to have separate rooms, like Zoom, you can have breakout rooms. So that's one method. But to make it simpler, I would say even just mute your microphone, go get on your phone and call outside of camera range to talk to your attorney, talk to your client separately. We don't have to overcomplicate this. And I think that's an important sort of social norm to make sure that we kind of get over, that we might feel really rude on the video call, like, hey, everybody's sitting here staring at their computers and I'm in the frame and I'm gonna go, yeah, hang on a second. I need to stop everything and I want to go away and have a private conversation with the other person on the screen. So we're both going to disappear. Like, this is just a new world of social norms that we're not accustomed to. But if you were sitting in a conference room, I don't think you'd hesitate to say, I'm going to duck outside with my client. So the fact that some of us are still feeling uncomfortable with the video conferencing, I mean, I think everyone's getting better, less worrying about perfection, like Helen said, just generally. I think all of our levels of perfection have to come down a little bit. I just think there's a sort of social thing there where we have to say, I'm okay with stopping everybody, letting them sit there in front of their computers while I go have a call with my lawyer who was also on the screen.
Boy, that amount of openness from the lawyer to communicate that to people, right? To set expectations by saying, this is what my communication is going to be like. John, I wanted to ask you, because you've been virtual for a while and dealing with these transactions and things. I feel like if we're adding sort of these communication norms in, it might make deals go a lot longer, right? Like take a lot longer to get to consensus just because you're bouncing around. What have you found works for that? Is there a channel that you prefer, email or phone, or what's the best way to keep a deal moving so that it doesn't fall apart while still respecting this new kind of pinging around communication?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally I like things that are more interactive. I tend to recommend. I often sort of have this bias that email, maybe for confirming details is good, but things like phone and face-to-face are always going to go better. I mean, sort of like Colin was saying, body language matters. But even without body language, even if we're doing video, there are norms and there are sort of ways that you can see what's going on with someone else. Whereas with email, I feel like trying to negotiate that way or negotiate over some sort of text-based medium is difficult. So, a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in, has been clients negotiating something over the phone. And whether it's a small thing like getting their bank to defer a payment or something larger, like a potential partnership, that can work really well. I mean, I think it's just really a matter of having the human-to-human connection, which I think can get lost in some different media, email being prime or any kind of text or Slack, but just to hear someone's voice and kind of understand where it is they're coming from is helpful.
Yeah, email doesn't have a sarcasm emoji, which really screws me up when I'm trying to communicate with people. We got to have that. Come on, tech people, fix this problem. Helen, I wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned to me the idea of different kinds of provisions in agreements that deal with, hey, communication's weird, here's what it's going to look like. How would you maybe adapt some of your contract provisions to include, hey, this is weird?
I'm going to talk about the provisions in a twofold manner. One, I think this environment is forcing us to have a process in place where we can continuously adjust and modify our contracts, because mistakes are going to happen. Zoom meetings are going to fail. The meeting is going to appear perfectly fine to one side. It's going to be completely silent to the other side. What did you talk about during that time? So make sure to have a process in place that doesn't necessarily punish or blame people for technical failures or misunderstandings, but moves on from that point to learn and to change your contracts. That way, you're a winner because you change your process, but your client is a winner too because they're being served better. In terms of some of the provisions that I can give as examples, definitely privacy. If you're using Zoom, there are all kinds of different reports out there that it may not be exactly private. It may or it may not be. We may not know for a long time. Is that in one of your provisions, that you have perhaps nicknamed the parties during the conversation to keep some of the privacy going for all the parties attending? If I am on a call on Zoom with an immigration client from another country, there might be a technical failure where they didn't hear me when I said, here is how much it's going to cost. Is there a provision in your contract that says before the signing of the agreement and after the Zoom meeting, there will be a written memorandum of everything that has been discussed, and there will be more definitions. So it's perhaps impossible to list all the provisions here, but make sure to have a process in place, because we are going to have a lot of new and different ideas. And for us to be able to respond to those, we need to make sure that we're thinking about them. And I think one of the most important things is going to be privacy. We thought we were private. The meeting was not private. What happens? Who bears the responsibility if there is a claim that comes out of that? And in terms of price point, what are you doing to change the provision in your contract that is making it more attractive to your clients? If you're offering WebEx, which may or may not be more private than Zoom, are you offering options to your clients? Is it their choice? Is it your choice? Is there a responsibility that comes with that? In terms of other provisions, names of the parties, again, it can be a long, long list, but it all comes down to paying attention, making sure that your client is now protected and you are protected in a very new environment, whether or not it lasts.
Yeah, and a little communication pro tip, always assume your Zoom camera is on, because I've seen some things in this that I cannot unsee. Chris, I was going to ask you a question, but now you've powerfully muted yourself.
I'm good. Just
You like control. Speaking of awkward communication meetings, I wanted to. Hey, kid, we got it. We got the live moment, people. 2020. So, Chris, I wanted to ask you with this communication thing. There's like a good and bad to this ability to communicate at any moment, at any time, to be reachable. How do you use hyper responsiveness as an asset in your business without, wanting to bury your phone in the backyard and then blow up your backyard because you're tired of getting phone calls all the time? How do you draw that line?
Sure. It all depends on whether that has been your modus operandi before you were beginning this. It's a hard thing to just initially engage in, but if you are a hyper responsive person, like, I am, every hour on the hour, checking emails, checking texts, making sure they're getting back. The effect that has when all of a sudden you go quiet with a party that is expecting that is a powerful effect. Because when you lose the ability to be in the same room and just sit across the table and be quiet and let them keep talking and let them keep presenting yourself, you've got to find new ways to leverage silence. And so if you are already a person that responds very quickly, that gets back, that sends the confirmation email that says, hey, yeah, I got that. And I'm on that, I'll get back to you. If all of a sudden you go quiet after an email has been sent or a correspondence has been sent, and there's not even the confirmation, it is a very strong tactical way of saying, hey, I'm listening still. I'm waiting for you to give me something better. I'm waiting for you to lay something more on the table. So hyper responsiveness can actually be very effective. One, I find that shows a lot of respect up front to people. When you say, hey, here you go, I got your email. I'm responding simply with the got it, I'll be in touch, is simply a sign of respect. And you can use that leverage it to the opposite side by saying, you know what, I don't think that's the best that you're giving me. Much like sitting across the table, hearing a presentation and just waiting, not saying anything, not confirming or denying that, and letting that silence do its work. Because anybody who's negotiated a long time knows the power of a silent table. The pressure to speak sometimes builds on people tremendously at that point in time. And so mastering that ability to be silent in a digital medium is effective. If you're not face-to-face, if you're not on a video conference and you are doing a lot of email correspondence, a lack of response can actually be very powerful.
I don't relate to. I don't like silence. Megan, it feels like there's a lot of, in the things that we've talked about so far, there are possible ethical implications. We talked about privacy stuff. We talked about kids walking in the background while you're having a meeting. if you're setting up the space for this, you're trying to create a deal space, control the room a bit. How might you do that in this deal context so that you're being ethical, but also creating an environment where, you know, people see Post-it notes so they think you're working? It's all fake, guys. But like, how do you create your physical space for these things?
Well, from an ethics standpoint, I think your biggest issues are confidentiality. And that's not just the means by which you're communicating. I know there was a question in our Q&A here about that, you know, that Skype or Zoom and can anyone hack it? Well, as far as your ethics obligations and what you can get in trouble for, you have to take reasonable precautions to make sure that your means of communication are secure. So you should have a Zoom room with a password, and you shouldn't be sharing a public link to Zoom on Twitter before you go head off to your supposedly confidential Zoom meeting. But we don't actually have a strict liability standard or a requirement that we use encrypted means of communication in order to avoid ethics trouble. So the standard is much lower, and it's reasonable measures. So your physical environment comes into play in the same way. You know, what is able to be seen from your camera? Make sure that behind you, you have something like here, I've got a plain wall. Mike, if you've got client names on those Post-it notes, I better not be able to zoom in and read them. No, they're fake. They have recipes, I promise.
Yeah.
At best.
There's the roast. And
yeah, because he
there's
names my
pasta.
vegetables when I can't figure out what they are. If you follow me on Twitter.
That's my
I
function,
post.
people. That's what I do.
Yes, that's Mike's biggest, most valuable function in my life is, hey, do you know what this random vegetable is? But that's actually really important. What can be seen? Because we actually don't always realize it. And I love telling this story about my own incompetence because I think it helps you recognize some things. I had some bank account numbers written on a note in my office because I was always needing those same numbers and I hated having to go and look them up. And hey, in my office, nobody ever saw them, right? I work at home, behind the door, no big deal. I closed the doors to get on a Facebook Live one time and thankfully checked what was going to be seen in my camera. I'll tell you, I did not check for ethics reasons. I checked for like, how did it look aesthetically? And I went, oh, I can read those bank account numbers. Like, this is a problem, right? So what can be seen in your video is really important. And it shouldn't be that you set up your environments to like, well, as long as I don't move, right here's perfect, right? Give yourself a big buffer that what if you turn your laptop? What if you tripped over the cord and it spun around? Is there something in that environment that's going to be seen? And then think about the sound, not just what can be heard in your microphone. Obviously, hopefully nobody heard my dogs barking a moment ago. I think my daughter took care of it. But that's part of it, right? What's going to get picked up by your mic and sent to the other parties? But also who's going to hear it on your end? Working from home, we probably are getting a little sloppy. I know a 5-year-old walking in, hey, he does not care if Google and Yahoo are merging, okay? He does not care. He can hear it. Nobody's going to be interested. But that has to really be kind of the standard you're going by. No one should be able to hear what's going on in your supposedly confidential deal room or in your confidential communications with your clients. So unless your spouse is a member of your law firm, as Chris can attest, like, hey, if his wife heard, he's probably good. She's a member of staff on the firm, they're good. Most of us, not so good. And that counts for the kids. It counts for roommates, spouses. So you set up your environment so you're kind of in a little capsule. Nothing's going in or out that shouldn't be.
If you do trip over your cord during the Zoom call, I want you to send me the video because that's awesome. Helen, we talked a bit about these communication things and how it sort of wraps into your business model. I want to ask you about using, like Chris talked about, hyper responsiveness, but these different tools that people are finally paying attention to. How do we use that to differentiate ourselves as attorneys trying to build our career or, trying to build a business?
This is definitely a time of opportunity. If we see these changes as obstacles, we're missing those opportunities. If you're a law firm that serves several companies for their contractual needs and you're not offering Zoom meetings or video meetings, you're not offering virtual negotiations to keep things flowing and moving for them, there may be another law firm that is your competitor right now. And if you have not yet looked into the concept of legal procurement, I absolutely recommend for you to look into it. In this environment, when most people are expecting a follow-up recession, or we don't know what it's going to look like, but it's still full of opportunity. In that environment, legal procurement professionals become the most important people working for companies buying legal services. So if you're doing your research, looking around yourself, looking to see what opportunities lay, virtual negotiations are definitely at the top with your clients, with your vendors, with your service providers, with your attorneys. How can you humanize these relationships and set yourself apart? If you're a law firm that serves a global company outside the country, let's say in Europe, and you bring in some people who can speak either their accent or their language, and you create this room that is very welcoming and very humanizing. And if they appear with their kids or dogs in the background, and you make this into a very nice conversation where you appreciate their surroundings, you're setting yourself up definitely for a better future, if not for yourself, for your law firm. So definitely look for the opportunities. This new time, new environment is full of changes, full of what we may think that are challenges, but in fact, really good opportunities.
Colin, I want to switch to some general principles and ask you a question. But before I do, Chris, I wanted to, Olena Savchuk in the comments asked a question I think is really relevant to all of this that we've talked about in terms of our ability to change to tools, and that is internet connectivity. She says, why don't you mention proper quality of internet connection and the time zone differences? Chris, I'm going to make an assumption about rural practice because it's the way it was for me. It's really cool when you say, let's fix access to justice by creating phone apps, but when you're creating them for people who can't get internet in the middle of nowhere, it's worthless. So if you're in a part of the world that doesn't have great connectivity, or you're in a rural area, how do you deal with these changes? I mean, you can't hop on Zoom very easily a lot of times.
Sure, and it's a strong reliance on just the phone line, just calling. Fortunately, rural America is developing with a wireless network. So usually cell phone connectivity is something that people do have. Now, to the video quality of having a cell phone connection, that's hit or miss. We have entire sections of our communities that have no internet and no Wi-Fi or no cell coverage, nothing in southeastern Ohio. And so it is a reality, but they have a landline. They've had a landline forever. And so, making those phone calls, getting in touch with them. We have a large Amish population here in our county. And obviously they've got a phone, but it's out by the road. So, following, and I know Megan would appreciate this, following the ethical procedures of leaving them a message when it's a community phone line and community messaging of saying, this is who it is, not even maybe saying you're with the firm, but that you're leaving a message for such and such. And so, it does rely heavily still on the very 1970s model of get on the phone and call somebody in that environment. And we still have to rely on paper mailings, where everybody else we could email, we still have to have somebody stuff the envelope with a letter and send it out. And so it's slower, but if you maintain good control and do good planning, you can still keep people informed and keep in touch with them. But yeah, it's a real struggle.
I'm imagining a whole sitcom of Chris setting up Zoom calls with the Amish community and how awesome that could go. Colin, so we've talked a lot about sort of what's changed, what's different in this context, but I want to shift a bit to eternal principles, to principles of when you're doing deals, when you're doing negotiations, here are things to pay attention to. And I wanted to ask you especially about if you're dealing with issues that are either highly sensitive or you just can't move on, you just can't give up that space on, how do you communicate that in a way to the other party that doesn't undermine the deal?
Yeah, so, that issue actually came up for me recently with a pretty large customer that was renewing with us. And you would think a renewal would be relatively straightforward affair, but it often isn't. So the way that I kind of would approach it is, I'm not trying to hide the ball from the other side. What I am trying to do, though, is position it so that, our position comes off as reasonable and not outrageous and not just trying to be you know, a road, excuse me, a roadblock. A road would be great. A roadblock, not so great. So, you know, the way I would do it is, you know, it's kind of explain, you know, look, you know, historically, you know, X, Y, and Z, this, you know, this sometimes, you know, is something that is of concern to us, given our business, given what we're trying to do. You know, this is not something that is out of the blue. This is fairly standard for our industry. Here's why we have to push forward with it. I know it's not what you're wanting to hear, but, you know, we feel like we've given in on some other areas. This is one where, unfortunately, we need to push back on a little bit harder. You know, talk about it as you wish and see what, you know, see what you want to come up with in terms of, you know, where we can go from here. I think that kind of, you know, partnership type positioning, I think, is really helpful, because ultimately, you know, the goal is for both parties to be reasonably happy at the end of the day. They don't both have to be ecstatic, but they have to be reasonably happy that both they got most of what they wanted, in some form or fashion. So I do think that finding a way to position it so that you're not just kind of saying no, but you're more saying, you know, yeah, this is just a really sticky issue for us because of the fact that this is our business, or because this is a bigger risk for us, or something like that. I think that's a right way to approach it, because then you're making it seem like it's not, you're just being a reasonable person. A reasonable person would have an issue with that in the context of your business.
Mm. So John, this might be too broad a question, but I'm curious what you think are sort of the most common mistakes in negotiations broadly, as opposed to this specific context, because it's interesting to think about which of those mistakes jump into this context.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I see broadly is people always approaching a negotiation as if it's a zero-sum game. Sometimes it is, but in a lot of cases, if we kind of come back to what we're trying to do, it's a collaborative effort. We're trying to reach a deal that people are going to mostly be happy with. And, you know, I think one of the ways to do that is also understand the other party's interest. So, you know, and I've been seeing this a lot in the current situation, where if we're asking for, you know, maybe changing a deal or going back and renegotiating terms of a contract, you know, we have to sort of think about, well, what does the other person need? What's their sort of limitation? Do they have commitments that they still have to honor, even if they want to give us everything we want? You know, we still need to understand what's their world, what's their context, because, you know, with a lot of my clients, we have had to go back and sort of see, is there a way we can negotiate a contract that maybe they're a part of? And, you know, one of the things is it doesn't need to be zero sum. And with this, everybody is dealing with change situation. Everybody's dealing with changes and difficulties. So it's really important to be flexible, and it's really important to be aware of the constraints other people might also be facing. You know, so while we can really easily see our own, sometimes it's difficult to see those of others, and it's really important to just make an extra effort to see that.
Well, Chris, you do like to make sort of a worst case scenario calculation. Is that for you and your client to know? Is that to present? Are you using that as a sort of a bludgeon to the other side to say, listen, you keep pushing this, here's what's going to happen? Why craft that worst case scenario in your head, and how out loud are you doing it?
One of my law school professors said it best: parade out the imaginary horrible things that could happen and try and prep for it. I think that's what they told us in contracts law, is trying to prep for all the imaginary horrible things. But what I find beneficial, especially with working with my clients first, is having an honest conversation about, this could be the worst end of this. You could pay me a lot of money and come out of this with nothing. You know, and walking through that with them. That is a very hard conversation that, quite honestly, in my experience as both a mediator and a negotiator, that I see a lot of attorneys and a lot of representatives defer to the other side to try and do that job for them. They defer to the other side to say, hey, they're going to lay out all the horrible things. I'm going to be the good guy and be here and try and get you all the best. But what happens is, and I love what John said, and I just phrase it a little differently, everybody leaves equally dissatisfied from the negotiation. You know, the reality of it being is, if you are not brave enough to have that conversation with your client because you're afraid of what that means, then you're artificially coloring the landscape of the negotiation itself. Because there is some probability that this could go really bad. There's something that they haven't told you. that maybe not until they've been forced to face the worst case that they have actually put out on the table. Not that our clients would lie to us. I never have had that happen. But that they sometimes want to still try and look the best they possibly can. And so catastrophizing in an honest, safe environment with your clients can oftentimes really bring the reality of the situation on the table, and even sometimes lay bare the thing that's controlling the negotiation that you're not aware of, their motives. What the motive is they have for pursuing what they're after right now. And understanding those things and reaching that point not only allows you to feel like, okay, I get this, we are on the same page, but it also allows you to come up potentially with creative solutions that weren't previously on the table. A lot of lawyers right now never thought, what is my COVID response? What is it that happens when I'm shut down and I'm losing 60% of my work and I'm having to lay off staff halfway? Those questions never really crossed our mind, but there have been a lot of creative solutions that we've seen come out of that. And a lot of that we probably would have benefited from catastrophizing before it happened. And so that's one aspect of it, is working with your clients on that difficult conversation. But then you have to understand that, sure, you might have done that and you may have had that hard conversation, but by and large, the other representative may not have. He or she may be deferring to you to catastrophize and cause their client to back up so they can look like the white knight riding in to save the day. And so you have to craft that narrative in such a way that it is compelling to the other side to realize there's a probability that this could go really bad for you. And if you're a person who's dealt with honesty and respect with the opposing side the entire way along, it really gives weight to your voice if you do say, I want to have an honest conversation about this. I'm not going to bully you. I'm not going to try and throw my weight around, but we're going to talk about the honest ramifications of what this is, what this could possibly be if it's gone wrong. And you've got to be willing to stomach being that immovable object of the worst case in order to get to sometimes creative solutions that never existed prior to going there.
Megan, I want to ask you a follow-up question on that. But before I do, I just want to remind everybody watching that we're going to, in a couple of minutes, open up to questions from you guys that we can put out to our panel. So make sure that Preston is paying attention. There's a Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. You can click that. You can put it in the comments. Preston's paying attention to that and is going to bring in some questions for us. So Megan, I recently wrote a piece for Law Insider that's going to come out on the blog, and I talked about Tony Lupino does this distinction between the no lawyer, the solutions lawyer, and the true counselor. And sometimes clients need us to bounce around those kinds of functions. But as Chris is talking about this worst case scenario, I'm thinking of my responsibility. How do I keep that optimism that the client has about the deal so that I can keep the deal moving and not become the no lawyer who just shoots everything down, but still do my job as a true counselor and being able to say, no, you need to look out for this worst case scenario?
Well, ethically, you've got to be honest and complete in your advice. You can't sugarcoat and act like those worst case scenarios don't exist. Because if you're going to face a malpractice action or a bar complaint, it's going to be from the client where everything went to worst case scenario and you kind of never told them that was a possibility. So ethically, you've got to make sure that you are giving all of that information. Now, I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying, look, realistically, I don't think this is going to happen and here's why, but you need to understand that this is a possibility.
I'm thinking of all these lawyers who talked to clients about the force majeure clause and all the crazy things that could happen. And the clients are like, nah, there'll never be a pandemic. It's fine.
Right. They probably
Helen,
never mentioned a pandemic. And I don't think you committed an ethics violation or malpractice by failing to mention the possibility of a pandemic. But yeah, if you had that in your head, you had knowledge, you had reason to think that it could happen, you probably should have mentioned it.
Right. And now we all know, which changes the reasonable person standard. But Helen, last question to you before we go to the group. To kind of pivot back to this strange moment, you had mentioned to me the idea of, for the procurement side, can you use these technologies and these shifts and these cultural trends that are happening to become a competitive advantage, to cheapen your product, to make it better, make it more responsive? Talk to me about how this changes sort of the procurement space.
Absolutely. Legal procurement is a very unique industry that focuses on savings. But that's not it. That's not the only thing they're focusing on. The corporate client is looking for fastest, cheaper, best legal services that they can find. So just because you offer cheaper services doesn't mean you get to have the bid to yourself. So always have the processes to make sure that what you're offering is of value to your client. You may think it's valuable, but does your client think so? You may think that your law firm is doing the best they can when they win the appeals and Supreme Court opinions and cases, but is it providing value to your client? So basically keep in mind, are you cheapest? Are you fastest? Are you the best in the industry to be providing the type of legal services that your client want? And basically focus on the fact that, yes, we are in these different times, but all that we're talking about is a tool, right? Always focus back on value. We're dealing with humans. Collaboration is always key. And am I offering the best that I can possibly offer while provide clear description to my clients that we really are the best for so many different reasons.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to turn the time over to Preston for questions. And just a reminder to you all, you can post questions in the Q&A feature and Preston will pull those out. Panelists, feel free to answer. You know, this is the clumsy part where we talk over each other. It just is what it is on Zoom. But we'll try to answer these questions. And before I turn it over to Preston, I just want to thank our panelists and all of you for watching. And I hope you stick with the Law Insider with the content that we're creating because we want to keep helping you. So stay in touch. Preston?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Mike. So we got about 12 minutes left. We're going to do as many questions as we can. I think as I'm going through these, a common theme that maybe has been asked and answered, but maybe, Mike, I'll do my best to form this. And if you want to pick it apart, you can. But as I'm going through this, I think for many of us, the act and process of negotiation is much more comfortable when it's, you know, when you're in the same room. And so questions around creating leverage, you know, creating fear, building rapport, right? So it's not just about fear, it's also creating trust, it's creating confidence in the process. We talked about silence a little bit and how that plays in, and certainly silence, you know, we all are animals and we spend so much of our lives trying to read body language. And so we talked about Zoom versus phone and technology capabilities that we have. So somewhere in here, Mike, I think that it's worth going back down the well on what are some best practices and strategies in a world where you don't get the personal connection, either from a fear perspective or a rapport perspective or whatever it may be. What are strategies we can employ to have a better outcome in a negotiation, understanding that we may not get to meet him in person, and we may not even get to see him face-to-face via video. Right. And what are some suggestions from the group?
Yeah, I think just to frame this for you guys, I think there's going to have to be some serious mindfulness about things that we used to take for granted, right? These emotional values that happen in these negotiations that we sort of do by instinct, by just reading other people, we're now going to have to say to ourselves, what are the emotional values that are going on, the shifts that are going on in negotiations, and how, now that I can't do that personally, how do I turn that into, can I still fill that emotional value with a letter, with an email, with a call, but being really mindful about those emotional values. So to the panelists, any tactics for how you might do that to deal with some of these emotional values?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think from my perspective, one thing that I think is valuable when you can't see the other person and to kind of set things off, at least in some kind of calm way, is I think you can't underestimate the value of small talk initially. It's just kind of chat about, you know, we're all going through this pandemic, chat a little bit about the pandemic, chat a little bit, you know, if you have a pet in the background, if you have a pet, you know, say, I apologize, hope you, you know, if you hear a meow or a bark, that's my dog or my cat. I think that type of thing does more than just simply, you know, establish small talk, but it also establishes a sense that you're a human being and that, you know, you've got a life and that there's other stuff going on, and that, you know, and you're not seeking to kind of argue your way through it. You're actually trying to just treat the other person as a human being. I think that's one thing that's really important in the profession is we have this, and by we, I mean lawyers, have this tendency to think of ourselves as kind of immune to emotion and immune to our own humanity. I would argue the opposite, that we need to embrace our own humanity and embrace the fact that the other side is also a human, and that they have a life and they have concerns, and that may play a role in how they're approaching this negotiation. So you need to understand that, that's an important concept to, I think, take into effect. And also, lawyers, I think, have a tendency also to be just naturally aggressive. They just naturally want to go after and win. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to win per se, but you don't want to win at all costs. You don't want a Pyrrhic victory where basically you've lost everything, but you still won because you're the only one left standing. So in the context of a negotiation, I think it's important to understand that, you sometimes have to give a little to get a little, and sometimes you have to give a lot to get a lot. And I think you need to recognize the fact that, this doesn't have to be an adversarial conflict. It can be just a discussion back and forth and kind of gauging how things are and then finding ways to move forward.
I'd like to jump in and say I agree 100%, and I don't think hyperbole is your friend in these kind of environments. Sometimes that aggressiveness that Colin was mentioning can drive us to take strong initial positions that are untenable, even if we were challenged on whether or not we could even support that position as it was. I think that in place of hyperbole and in place of exaggerated positions that we're willing to back off of, the need for accuracy is essential right now, especially if you're in a sterile environment of email. The need to be as accurate and clear as possible, and then spending time going back over those with people when you do have a phone call or a video chat with them and saying, are we on the same page? Or pays dividends out because it cuts off misunderstanding as soon as possible in that. And so that would be my advice in this time is don't hyperbolize, don't take extreme positions, take reasonable positions advocating for the benefit of your client that are as accurate and clear and sustainable as possible. And let your yes be yes and your no be no, because that's really what you're burning right now. Is if you can't follow through on these things and you can't hold up the end of the negotiation that you're saying you're holding up, you're burning that bridge at a time where you don't have an in-person time for people to get to know you in a better way.
Well, and to follow up, if you don't mind, Preston, I want to ask another question from the group. But on that, Chris, I was thinking we all have to realize that the other side that we're talking to has only so much emotional capacity. And for a lot of people, a bunch of it is taken up by dealing with their kids and dealing with school stuff and so you used to be able to push somebody, but right now that little push, given the rest of their day, might be enough for them to tell you to jump off a cliff. And somebody asked about international cross-border issues, and Colin, you pointed out this, let's talk about the universality of this experience to connect us. But this is also really unevenly distributed, right? And recessions always are, right? The way these things impact different people. If I'm dealing with cross-border issues or different communities or people who are experiencing something very different, how do I change my language and my approach to adjust to their context? And that's for anybody. Helen, you might have thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to combine the two questions, the two recent questions. I think one key point is in this environment, dealing virtually, it doesn't matter how prepared I am. If I don't demand attention and focus from the other side, I am going to go nowhere. So part of my process should include, here is what would make an ideal meeting. This is a very important point, very important agreement. Let's set aside some time and talk about it. So even if I'm prepared on this side, giving you definitions or offer or proposal, if the other side is not in a position to receive language, to receive emotional language or body language just from the video, then it's not going to work. So I would advise that while we're changing our processes to make our end perfect, we must also add some qualifications, some standards as to what must happen on the other end. Should it be a closed door room? Yes, cute kids and dogs are very nice and it humanizes all of us, but is there a point where where everybody closes the doors and we focus on the conversation, because we can't be there in person, and the next best thing may be to give all our attention and not to create any distractions on either end.
Anybody else have thoughts on the idea of adjusting to someone else's experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, in a prior role, I worked for a large global company and had folks kind of around the world. And so all the time when I was on the phone or in video, I was kind of making cultural adjustments to their approach, because not everyone had the same attitude with regards to a certain issue. Not everyone worked at the same pace. Some people just frankly didn't understand things or view things the same way. So I think there's something to be said for kind of finding a common way to address issues and putting some structure around what you're wanting to talk about. And so I think when you initially set out a negotiation, especially if it's a cross-border transaction, it's kind of saying, all right, here's what we're dealing with, here's where things stand, and here's what remains open, and seeing what the response is and seeing how folks respond. And if there are questions, address those questions. That way you set off everyone on the same page, and there's a set of expectations that everyone can relate to. Because I do think sometimes, things can get lost in translation even when you're speaking the same language. And especially if you can't see someone, it's more important than ever to be clear about what you're trying to accomplish and make sure that everyone else has that same goal in mind.
So Preston, I think in closing, what we might do is just, there are still a lot of questions, and those are very useful to me and to us as we're creating content for you guys and figuring out what do you care about? What are the things on your mind? So make sure you stay in touch with us so that we continue to be able to answer those questions. The last thing I want to do is just go around the room and get each of the panelists to tell us how we can reach out to them if we've got more questions about their work and these issues that we've talked about. So let's, Colin, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. So I have a website, www.colinsLevy.com. That's my blog, my website. I'm also very active on Twitter at @CLevy_law. So those are probably the two best ways to get in touch with me.
Excellent. Helen, how about you?
And Colin, if you and Colin and Helen and others, as you're reading these off, you feel free to put those URLs and information into the chat box so folks can.
Helen, how about you? What's the best way to reach you?
Yes, I was just writing it down because for those who do not speak Turkish, my last name is impossible. My email address is helen@helenbukirmaz.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, you can find me on Facebook. As long as you can spell my last name, you will find me.
John, how about you, buddy?
Yeah, my website is counselforcreators.com. You can find me there, or you can find me on Twitter, John Tobin LA, JONTOBIN LA.
Megan?
Best way to reach me is on Twitter @Xavier Law. I put that in the chat.
And Chris?
TheWhiteLawOffice.com. I'll toss everything in chat as far as social media handles and everything.
And for me, the easiest way is Twitter because it is cheaper than therapy. I'm just at Mike Whalen Jr. Preston, I'll turn it back to you with thanking the panelists for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks for everyone for joining. Really, to the panelists, taking time out of your day to present is a big deal and a big commitment, and we appreciate it. To the 300 or so who joined us today, thank you. Yes, we will be sending a recording. Yes, we're going to do more webinars. There was a bunch of questions about force majeure and clauses that we might be drafting in these very difficult times. We will be delivering and presenting on content. A lot of people asked about blocking and tackling, a good North American term for sort of the details of how you organize and structure virtual events, because that protocol and that cadence is different when you're doing in person. So we will do more on that. So there's a lot more coming. You can email me if you have ideas or topics that either you would like to present on. I'll put you in contact with Mike. We'll get you on stage with us. If there's topics that you just want to learn about that we missed today or that you just think is important, let us know. I'm at Preston, Preston, at lawinsider.com. And we're going to continue to put these events on and deliver as much value and information as we can. Again, thank you to the panelists. We know everyone is going through really challenging times right now, so we love you all. We're here to support you. We know that this is just one small piece of value to a complicated day, but hopefully it was it was a breath of resource and support and information that you needed. And that's it. Mike, thank you, sir. And to everyone else, have a great rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you